Hi, and welcome to Berry Aftercare. Maybe you're listening to the podcast, maybe you're watching the video, but I'm excited to share today's content with you. And I want to tell you a story before even introducing the subject, which you may have seen in the email that I sent out this morning. But either way, here's what happened today. And life is very, very interesting in this way because I had this topic picked out, and then I met a woman today to have coffee with her. And I've never sat down and talked with this woman before. She's a member at the church where I go, and she is in charge of one of the programs there. So we sat down to talk, and she was asking about what I did for work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Turns out, as life has it, that her husband had weight loss surgery several years ago. And shortly thereafter, he developed thyroid cancer and went through all of that, had his thyroid removed. In the process of the stress and the turmoil and whatever, he resorted to old eating behaviors and he has regained all of the weight. And she said that he has resumed his old eating behaviors. So I said, well, I've never met him, but it sounds like it may be food addiction. And she just shook her head, nodded in agreement, and said, you would never get him to admit that in a million years. I said, I completely understand that. And I don't think that is an uncommon situation. Then I shared with her my story of having gone into treatment for my own addictions 30 some years ago, and how I, like her husband, was not willing to admit that I was an addict. I went under the guise of being a concerned family member. Well, it didn't take them long to understand from what I was saying and from the kinds of comments I made, the behaviors I had, the defensiveness that I had, all those things that addicts tend to share that, you know what, maybe I had my own issues with addiction. And so that is what led to my becoming a recovering addict. And I am so very, very grateful, which I share with people all the time. Anyway, the topic for tonight is food addiction. And I thought it was very, very interesting that I ran across a woman today whose life has been affected by food addiction. And we didn't get too much into the enabling role, which usually belongs to the partner of the addict, but she did ask a few questions about that. Anyway, ironic maybe that we talked about that today, but food addiction is not something that is uncommon. What is uncommon is for people to sometimes recognize that they have a food addiction or recognize that food addiction actually exists. That's not just with the lay population, but with the professional population as well. One of my great pet peeves. Anyway, what I want you to do as you listen today is listen to what I have to say in relation to yourself. You can listen in relation to other people that you may be thinking of because it's always easier to see addiction in somebody else, right? And I want you to listen to the description of what constitutes an addiction in relation to other areas in your life or the lives of other people that may signal there may be an addictive behavior going on there. Because as I like to explain to people, addiction itself is like an umbrella. So if you have an umbrella, you have many, many, many spokes, but it's still called an umbrella. So the umbrella, the fabric of the umbrella, is what I refer to as addiction. Each one of the spokes can represent different addictions. One spoke may represent food or eating. One spoke may represent shopping or spending. One spoke may represent alcohol. Another spoke may represent other drugs besides alcohol. Another spoke may represent nicotine, which is, of course, another drug. Another spoke may represent pornography. Another may represent television watching. Another may represent reading. Another may represent exercise. Anything can become an addiction. Another may represent, this is a big umbrella, right? It's got a lot of spokes. may represent gaming, like video gaming. So almost anything can be an addiction. And we're going to talk about where's the line? What separates the line between, maybe a hobby, maybe a problem, maybe an abuse of something versus an addiction? That's what we're going to talk about today. And I want to start by asking you a question. Do you believe that emotional eating is part of the addiction continuum? What do I mean by addiction continuum? Well, addiction, like the disease of obesity, is a chronic disease. What that means is it gets worse over time. There's no cure for addiction. And if a person goes into remission, in other words, they quit engaging in the addiction, when and if and when they resume the behavior, for example, alcohol consumption, they typically resume at very close to the level of tolerance they had when they quit drinking. In other words, when people first start drinking alcohol, they they know what it feels like if they want to get tipsy, if they want to get drunk, if they want to like lose their mind, right? So they know about how much they can drink to get the effect that they want. As a person progresses on the addiction continuum from an addiction to through the severity of the disease, which is chronic and gets worse over time, they develop tolerance. So if when you first started drinking, if 2 beers made you tipsy, now maybe it takes 4 or 6 or 8. And it takes more and more and more to get the what they call desired effect. So if you want to get totally drunk, maybe now you're drinking a pint or a fifth or a quart or a gallon of alcohol. I don't know. I don't drink anymore, so I don't even know the measurements of alcohol anymore. But the point is that addiction develops along a continuum because there is usually tolerance. When it comes to things like shopping, maybe the tolerance is maybe you used to, spend $15 over your budget and you got all nervous and you got that adrenaline and you got that feeling, that change of mood, the alteration of your mood, which is kind of what people are seeking when they engage in addictive behaviors. And it got you all, nervous and excited and that adrenaline flowing and the change in mood. Well, maybe over time, it's like now you're spending $50 and then $100 and then $300. And now you're like, you spend $500 to get that same feeling of disconnection from whatever else you want to avoid in your life. Same with gaming. Maybe people used to spend 30, 40 minutes and then they had trouble getting off and then getting off the game. And then they play for 2 hours and then they had to play for 4 hours and then they had to play for 6 hours and got more and more difficult to set a stopping point to quit. Same with gambling, same with shopping, we already mentioned, same with cigarettes. Maybe you smoked 2 cigarettes when you started, now you're smoking 2 packs a day. There's a tolerance. Same with food. Maybe you used to get an ice cream cone and you would feel better if you were upset. And then it was a pint of ice cream. And now then it was a half a gallon. And now you can eat a gallon of ice cream before you get the numbness, maybe the emotional numbness you're looking for from ice cream. So addiction is a chronic disease. It takes more and more and more and more. And as you get further along the continuum, there are usually more social problems, more relationship problems, more problems at work, at home, in every area of your life. We're going to focus on food, but I'm going to branch off a little bit and talk about other addictive behaviors. So let's talk about emotional eating to begin with, because many, many, many people that I work with in the bariatric population identify themselves as emotional eaters. And so we know that emotional eating is in response to an emotion that feels unpleasant to you. So if you get upset or worried or scared or fearful or bored or anxious or nervous or lonely or mad, you want to avoid feeling that way, sometimes people will eat in response to that emotion because it changes their mood. So if you're angry, you reach for ice cream and all of a sudden you don't feel so angry anymore. Or if you're lonely and you start eating cookies or pudding or mashed potatoes or some kind of comfort food, your mood changes. You no longer feel so lonely. You feel comforted. So, emotional eating is seeking from food or from the act of eating a change in emotion, a change in how you feel. Now, is emotional eating part of the addiction continuum? I'm going to say it depends. Well, what does it depend on? Well, it depends on how your life is impacted because there are a lot of people who are social drinkers. Alcohol doesn't impact their lives in any negative way. They don't drive while they're drinking. They don't, get grumpy and mean and take it out on their family. They don't break promises. They're home when they say they're going to be home. They pay their bills. They're a super functional, responsible adult. If you drink on and on and on and have an addiction potential and your drinking becomes problematic and you start breaking promises like I'll be home by 9, you show up at 2. Or if your drinking escalates to the point where you're hungover and you call into sick. Now your drinking is starting to affect your life in different areas in negative ways. Is that necessarily an addiction? Not yet, but you're on the way to a problem for sure, right? So here's how you kind of define it. If there's a problem, there's a problem. So, we will talk about emotional eating and the purpose of it. So, when we emotionally eat, if the purpose of eating is to change how you feel so you don't have to deal with something going on in your life, that might be a problem because healthy, responsible adults learn to deal with life on life's terms. In other words, if your parents are ill or your kid gets sick or something happens at work or you lose your job or all of the things that happen in life that are really, really stressful, we need to learn to deal with them. Identify our feelings, work through the feelings, deal with whatever kind of consequences or outcomes there may be and deal with it rather than avoiding dealing with it through the use of alcohol, drugs, shopping, or any other thing. So I just want to read a quote from a man or a woman, I don't even know. It's Ali Shapiro, who has a podcast called Food Heaven Podcast with this really nice quote. She or he says, with emotional eating, we assume that we need the brownies or alcohol in the case of alcohol. What we really need is the self reflection and awareness of what's happening. In other words, we got to deal with what's going on instead of avoiding what's going on through food or alcohol or drugs or shopping or gambling or whatever. So, a lot of people in the addiction field, a lot of the experts say that addiction is a mood alterer. We use something because it alters our mood. We don't want to be where we're at, so we alter our mood. And in that regard, emotional eating, or you can be an alcoholic without being, shaking and needing alcohol to survive. I was a very functional alcoholic, as are a lot of people. I used alcohol because I didn't like the way I felt. I was covering some insecurities, a lot of insecurities, covering shame, having liquid courage because I didn't believe in myself. So alcohol helped me feel about myself a different way than I did. So I used it because I thought I needed it. I thought I needed the change in how I felt that I got from alcohol in order to function. I didn't need alcohol because I would shake if I didn't have it. I wasn't physiologically addicted to alcohol. So some people feel like they have to go to the drive-through if they're feeling an uncomfortable feeling. They feel like they have to have some food when they're upset. They feel they need emotionally, maybe not physically, but emotionally, they need something sweet when they're angry. They need something soothing, food wise, when they're lonely. So, in that sense, in my mind and in my professional and personal opinion, and from working with people for the last 17 years in this arena, I believe that emotional eating can be the early stages of the continuum of food addiction because you're eating to alter your mood. You're eating to avoid how you're feeling. So that's just my thought. But let's talk about what an actual addiction is. And to do that, I'm going to ask you some questions. We're going to kind of take a quiz here. And I've done this quiz probably on the podcast, but absolutely on many, many videos that I've done in the past. I'm going to do it several times a year because I think it's really, really critical information. And sometimes people can hear things two, three, six, seven times before they go, oh my gosh, that is me. That is a description of me. So, in the books that the psychologists and doctors use to determine if something's an addiction, they no longer even call it addiction. They call it a substance use disorder. So, the substance could be anything. There are also behavioral addictions. For example, shopping is not a substance, it's a behavior that does the same thing for people, alters their mood in the way that eating does for another person or having a beer does for another person. Same with gambling. So there can be behavioral addictions. I'm sorry about that scratching. That's my cat at the door. Hopefully she'll go away and maybe you don't even hear it over my voice. But if you do, that's what that is. All right, so I'm going to ask you a series of questions that are referred to in this book, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, that professionals use to determine if a person has a substance use disorder. Now, like I said earlier, you can use this information to determine your relationship with food to see if it's problematic in the sense of an addiction, or you can think about alcohol, shopping, gambling, pornography, internet, whatever. Anything that interferes with your life to a significant degree that helps you avoid your life, your emotions, the realities, it's probably a problem. Here's how I like to summarize it. If it's a problem, right? But here are the criteria they use to determine whether there is a disorder in relation to this substance. The first question is, have you consumed more than you planned? So, in other words, you eat more, you drink more, you spend more time shopping or gambling, or spend more money, or you spend more time playing video games, or you spend more time reading than you thought. So, you use whatever it is in larger amounts over longer periods of time than was intended. So, you say to yourself, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to go to the buffet and I'm going to have one plate of food and one dessert. But by the time you've left there, you've had three plates of food and four desserts. So you consumed more than you planned. Or you're going to stop at the bar on the way home from work and have a beer, but you consume three or four, right? You consume more than you planned, or you plan to spend $50 and you end up spending 150. So that's question one. So keep track of how many points you get, all right? So if that criteria fit for you, you have 1 point. All right, here's the second one. Have you been able have you been unable, not able, to cut down or stop? All right, so here's the real criteria. There's a persistent desire or unsuccessful effort to cut down or control substance use. So we all know the person who says, I can quit drinking whenever I want to. And they do for a period of 3 months or 6 months or whatever. And so they make themselves feel better because they were able to control their use of alcohol for a short time. But after that 6 months, when they think they've passed the test, they're back drinking and they're drinking even more. So, what about food? Have you been unable to cut down or stop? You've wanted to. You want to cut down on carbs. You want to stop the use of sugar. You want to stop overeating to the point that you're so full you feel sick. Your doctors told you, you need to cut down. You want to, but you've been unsuccessful. And don't let yourself get off the hook by saying, I quit for 3 months. That's not what this is saying. Well, unless you've been able to cut down and maintain that. So if you've cut down to 2 healthy servings of carbs a day, which is recommended for a bariatric patient, and you're able to stick to that, no problem. But if you did that for 3 months, but all of a sudden, you're eating 400 or 500 grams of carbs again a day or sugar, then you didn't really sustain being able to cut down or stop. Now, most people that I've worked with in the field of bariatrics or the field of substance abuse have a point for this one. So at this point, you either have 1 or 2 points. Here's the third question. I think there's 11. So here we go. The third question is, have you spent a lot of time tracking down certain foods, eating, or getting over the use of food? The actual criteria is a great deal of time is spent in activities necessary to obtain the substance, use the substance, or recover from its effects. So let's take alcohol or drugs or whatever. You have a specific kind of beer you want or a specific kind of any kind of alcohol. You drive all over the city until you find a place that has it. What about with food? You want a Krispy Kreme donut and you want it hot. So you're going to drive all over town until you find a Krispy Kreme where the hot sign is flashing so you know it's fresh, or a brand of ice cream, or a brand of cookie, or whatever it is, a specific kind of pizza. Do you spend a lot of time tracking it down because you just gotta have it? Do you spend a lot of time eating it or getting over feeling sick from it, like you ate the whole pizza and you can't move for 3 hours? All right, that's the third criteria. You have a point for that or you don't. So now you can have 1, 2, or 3, or 0 points. All right, question 4. Do you or have you experienced cravings? A craving is a strong desire or an urge. I've got to have this and I've got to have it now. Now, this can happen with emotional eating as well, because emotional eating comes on fast, it comes on strong, it comes on in the form of a craving, and you got to have a specific thing. That doesn't necessarily mean you have a food addiction. However, you might. All right, so have you experienced cravings? That's the fourth question. The fifth one, have you experienced failure in your role obligations because of your substance use? So the actual criteria is recurrent use of the substance, whether it's food, alcohol, whatever, is resulting in a failure to fulfill major role obligations at home, work, or school. So let's think about this for a minute, because I think most people would initially say, no, my food issues haven't resulted in my experiencing failure in my role obligations. Well, let's think about it for a minute. Do you have children and your children want you at their activities, and yet your weight has prevented you from being able to attend? That may be the result of your use of food. Do you work for a place and they require you to come to functions or encourage you to come to functions, but because you feel too much shame about how your appearance is, you don't go? And that's kind of a role obligation. Or have you gotten to the point where mobility is an issue and so you're unable to get to the office easily? So I don't know. You have to decide for yourself. Are you able to help your children with creating science projects, or has your weight resulted in your difficulty with mobility? You have to decide. But the question is, have you experienced failure in your role obligations? With alcohol, it's like, are you calling in sick because you're hungover? Are you showing up late for work? Are you missing important meetings? Or, whatever it is. And this can happen with, video gaming. People start missing school, they start missing work, they start not going to their sports team practices because they want to stay home and play. This can happen with reading. You sit down to read and you don't want to quit, and so you don't. And so your kids are like, why didn't you pick me up from school today? It can happen with anything. If you fail to fulfill your role obligations, whatever those are, because of something that's more than just once, it's probably a problem. All right. Question 6. Have you continued to use the substance or the behavior? Have you continued in the behavior despite having persistent or recurrent, ongoing, social or interpersonal problems caused by or made worse by the effects of the substance? Let's break that down. Let's say you're drinking and your spouse is like, I'm really getting sick of this. You say you're going to be home by 6 for dinner because you stop at the bar every night. Now you're getting home at 7:30, 8 o'clock. I'm really sick of it. So there's a recurrent problem in your relationship. Or you're starting to miss too much work because of hangovers. Or, your spouse says something to you, and maybe one of your children says, I'm really worried about you drinking. Or, Daddy, why weren't you at my game? It's because you were at the bar. Or maybe your boss says something and a good friend says something. So are you getting messages from different areas? Let me ask it in food terms. Have you continued to consume unhealthy foods that you know are causing you problems? In other words, they're causing problems with your family members because people are saying, I'm worried about your weight. It's scaring me. You've gained a lot of weight. You're unable to participate in our lives, right? So, do you stay up at night so you can be alone with food while your partner goes off to bed and they're complaining, you never go to bed with me anymore because you'd rather stay up and have your relationship with food? And here's what happens, believe it or not, with addiction. Whatever your addiction is becomes your primary relationship. You spend more time in your relationship with that thing or that substance or doing that behavior than you do the other people who are important in your life. So, have you continued to consume unhealthy foods in spite of knowing that you have a persistent, recurring social or interpersonal problem? You know you're not going to your kids' games. You know you're not going to the work events. You know you're not showing up at family reunions. You're not because you don't like how you look, right? Any problems that are caused by food or your weight, and you continue to engage in those things. So if alcohol is causing you a problem and you're starting to get in trouble at work because you're missing work, then somebody who doesn't have a problem would quit. Or if you get a DUI, somebody who doesn't have a problem wouldn't drink and drive anymore. But somebody who does have a problem might continue to do that. Anybody can get a DUI, right? Anybody. But somebody without a problem doesn't get a second one. So you've got to ask yourself and be honest with yourself. Is your use of food continuing to cause problems in your marriage, in your relationship, in your partnerships with your children? If it is, it's a problem. All right, question 7. Have you given up important activities because of eating or your weight? So, important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up or reduced because of your weight or your food. So maybe you're somebody who really loved to play pickup games, but now you can't because your weight won't allow you to. Maybe you're somebody who really loved crafting and you got together with a group of people who did crafts, and now you're either embarrassed by how you look and so you don't participate anymore, or it's just too much energy and it takes too much effort and it's too painful to get there because of your mobility. Have you given up things in your life because of your weight or your eating? Things that were important to you. 8. Have you used in physically hazardous situations? Recurrent substance use in situations where it's physically hazardous. Well, the obvious one is drunk driving. But what about driving angry and shoving food in your face? That's hazardous. I don't know, that might not fit for a lot of people, but it may fit for you, right? Are you in a frenzy, a food frenzy, or you're in the middle of a binge, but you're also driving? That could be dangerous. All right, question 9. Have you continued again to consume unhealthy foods despite knowledge of having a persistent or recurrent physical or psychological problem caused by food or your weight? The vast majority of patients I work with, because they're having weight loss surgery, have experienced this. Not everybody, but most people. The doctor says, your diabetes is getting out of control. If you don't lose some weight, I'm worried about your kidneys and your this and your that and your other thing. Or maybe your doctor says you're flirting with a heart attack or a stroke because you've got to lose some weight in order for that to happen. Or you're at risk for this because of your weight. Or if you don't lose some weight, I'm worried about this aspect of your health. So your doctor says this is causing problems and it's going to get worse, and you don't quit, right? Somebody who says you're going to die if you smoke one more cigarette. If that person continues to smoke, they're an addict, without a doubt. If you continue to eat bacon and high cholesterol foods or high fatty foods or high carb foods or whatever it is your doctor says to you, you're going to kill your liver, or you're going to be in kidney failure, or whatever it is, and you don't stop. That's a problem. No question about it. That is a problem. All right. Question 10. Have you developed a tolerance? Do you need more to get the result you are seeking? So again, I explained that a little earlier. Maybe if you were upset before and you had an ice cream cone, you felt better. Then you didn't feel so much better with an ice cream cone. You needed more of the ice cream. So it's a tolerance. You need more and more and more to feel the, to not feel. You don't want to feel how you feel. So you're using food or alcohol or shopping or gambling or whatever it is, so you don't feel the way you don't want to feel. All right, last question. Last question. Have you experienced withdrawal? Have you used food to avoid or relieve withdrawal symptoms? Interestingly, in the group therapy that I do online every week, there was a woman who a couple of weeks ago quit eating sugar, cold turkey, quit eating it, knew it was a problem for her, knew she was addicted to sugar because when she started, she didn't want to stop. That's another criteria. When you start, you can't stop. One of the addiction experts in the country says, if you can't take it or leave it, you're probably addicted to it. So for a lot of people with food, once they start eating something, their brain wants more and more and more of it. Maybe not all at once. It doesn't mean you're going to lead to a binge, but it's like you can't get it off your mind. And it's very often sugar. Otherwise, it might be the salty fat combination that once you start eating it, you're just distracted. You want more of it. It's hard to say no. You can't stop. You have cravings. It's because your brain chemistry becomes hijacked. And that's how they describe it. It's like, why would you do this? Your brain is hijacked. You want more and more and more of it because there's an addiction. Okay, but have you experienced withdrawals? So this woman quits sugar. 2 weeks later, we meet again, and she's like, I relapsed on sugar because I got so sick coming off of it. Shakes, crabbiness, nausea, feeling like crap, just awful. So if you've experienced withdrawal and you then use the substance to relieve the withdrawal, it's most likely an addiction. So here's how the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, decides to what degree this is a problem: substance use disorder. So if you answered 2 to 3 of those questions applied to you, they say you have a mild substance use disorder. All right, you got a problem. If you answered 4 to 5, you've got more of a problem because it's affecting your life in more ways. And if you answered 6 or more, you have a severe problem. So those are the criteria. Don't get all worked up about it. What you want to do is answer these 2 questions. Has food caused a pattern of problems in your life? Not just one problem, a pattern in different areas with different groups of people, with different entities in your life in different areas. Have you continued to eat unhealthy foods despite knowing there have been negative consequences? So if it's a problem, it's a problem. I don't care what you call it. You can call it emotional eating, you can call it substance use disorder, you can call it food addiction. Call it whatever you want. The thing that I urge you to do is not ignore it. You've got to get treatment for an addictive problem because it has a life of its own from the obesity problem. So listen to this very, very, very carefully. If you're planning to, or if you had weight loss surgery and you then or now realize that you may have a food addiction or a real problem with food that you can't stop, even though you may want to, that you return to over and over and over again, that's causing problems in your life, then you may have a food addiction. So if you go into the operating room and you have the disease of obesity on one hand, and you have the disease of addiction on the other hand, the surgeon, the bariatric surgeon, is treating your obesity, the disease of obesity. The bariatric surgeon is not treating the disease of addiction. So you come out of the operating room and you go to your room and you start to heal up from the disease of obesity. The addiction is alive and well, and you may be going through withdrawal because now, immediately after surgery, there's not a lot of options for you in terms of getting that craving for sugar or carbs or salty fat met. So your addiction may be on a little bit of a rampage, and this can cause problems for people. Really intense emotions, really fluctuating, like highs and lows emotionally, physical stuff, which you may not be too aware of because most people are on pain medication immediately after surgery. But as you start to heal, what's going to happen if you haven't treated your addiction separately, independently, individually, and at the same time, you're likely to turn to another addiction. Hence, the commonality of transfer addiction following weight loss surgery. So, a lot of people have that brain seeking the reward that they get from food. Well, guess what? Alcohol, other drugs, shopping, gambling, other things can fake the brain into thinking it's getting that same reward because addiction is addiction and a lot of the same reward centers in the brain are triggered. And so a lot of people start drinking, which is a real problem for bariatric patients because one drink after surgery feels like three, and within 5 minutes you're legally intoxicated. So it's like, wow, if I have a drink or even half of a drink, I don't care about that problem anymore. So now I no longer have to feel lonely, upset, angry, worried. So it's very easy for alcohol to become a substitute addiction if food was an addiction for you. It's very easy for shopping to become a problem. It's very easy for other drugs, pain medication in particular, to become a problem. Gambling, random hookups for sex with people. I have heard it all, let me tell you. It's not that uncommon. So, the message of this is if you recognize that you have an addiction, whether it's to food or alcohol or anything else, get help, get separate help for your addiction, and continue to treat your obesity just like the bariatric dietitian has told you to. Follow that process to treat your obesity. Eating every couple of hours, eating protein first, getting in the fluid, all those things. Get help for your addiction. There are all kinds of ways you can get help for addiction, but addiction is a separate entity. First of all, if you have an addiction, you have to be abstinent from the substance. If you're addicted to sugar and sugar hijacks your brain, sorry, you have to be abstinent. That is not a fun thing for people to hear. They don't want to think about living the rest of their life without sugar. And the good news is you don't have to think about it. You have the option to say, today I choose no sugar. Maybe tomorrow. Today I don't need to have sugar. Today I don't need to have chips. Today I don't need to have whatever it is. Just today. And that's how people develop long-term recovery from whatever it is, one day at a time. That's why they have that slogan, one day at a time. It's too much to think I'll never ever again in my life have, ice cream or a donut or whatever. But if you're addicted to sugar, it's going to mess you up in the head because the minute you ingest it, you're going to crave more of it. That's the way it is. And it sucks, but that may be your reality. So you got to get help for this because you're not going to do it on your own. I almost guarantee you that. So there are things like OA, which is Overeaters Anonymous. There's Celebrate Recovery. There's Smart Recovery. There's all different kinds of recovery programs. Look and find one that works for you. But trust me when I say it's almost impossible to overcome addiction on your own. We need support. Just like it's almost impossible to keep your weight off after bariatric surgery without having a good, solid group of support people. The same is true with addiction. There's a website called intherooms.com where you can listen to recovery stories all day, every day. You don't need to share anything if you don't want to. I would absolutely encourage anybody with a food addiction to read a couple of books. One is Overeaters Anonymous, The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Phenomenal. Another one is Food Junkies, second edition by Dr. Vera Tarman. She is a medical doctor and she explains the biology of addiction in a way I could never explain it. Very understandable, brilliant. I wrote a book called Weight Loss Surgery Does Not Treat Food Addiction, and talk about different ways to treat addiction as well. So there are a lot of things you can do. You can look up food addiction. And here's where I struggle with professionals. There are a lot of professionals, particularly those who work in eating disorder community, and they will say no food is off limits. You hear this a lot at bariatric conferences among professionals as well. They say everybody needs to make friends with all foods. I agree with that unless you have an addiction. If you have an addiction, you don't need to try to make friends with a brownie or ice cream or candy because it's not going to happen. Because if you're an addict, your brain responds differently than if you're not an addict. And that's the truth. So read the book, Food Junkies, and you'll understand why it's not safe for somebody who's addicted to sugar to dabble in sugar. It doesn't work. You will relapse every time. You'll get the brain fog. You'll get the unclear thinking. You can't make really, really good decisions when you're under the influence of something that affects your brain like a drug. All right. That's a lot to take in one podcast, one video. So I'm going to follow up. I will put the questions from the DSM into a worksheet. You can look at it yourself, and I will give a list of resources for you. But if you think you have an addiction to food or anything else, please do yourself a favor and get the help you need, independently of the help you're getting for your disease of obesity, because they're two separate diseases and both need to be treated simultaneously. You don't have to live with your brain hijacked because of addiction. I have been clean and sober for over 30 years, and it's a different life. And the reason I do what I do is because I want people to find the joy and the freedom that comes from not living in a world chaining you down with addiction. And so I'm going to leave you there, probably with more questions than you had coming in. But I would encourage you to do your own research about food addiction. I will tell you that Weight Watchers does not believe in food addiction. I read that in one of their magazines. A lot of professionals do not believe in food addiction. I've worked in the addiction and recovery field for over 30 years, and there's a lot of professionals who do understand that food can be an addiction. So, you know what? You've got to be the judge for yourself. It's your life, and you've got to live it however makes you happiest. But I know that living in addiction is not the happiest way anyone can live. So I would leave you with what I leave you every time. It's your life, it's your health, it's your responsibility this day and every day. Thank you so much for joining me. And please invite your friends, anybody who has any kind of addiction or you suspect they do, to listen to this podcast. And please go to Bari Aftercare www.berryaftercare.com to learn more about the full Berry Aftercare program. Thanks for spending your time with me. I very, very much do appreciate that you guys take the time to listen and to comment and to contact me. It means a lot. All right, thanks. Make it a great one. I will see you later in the week. Bye-bye.